writing picture books as well?
Well, that's a good question. Like I said, I started with poetry when I
Hmm.
was your guys' age, but then I got into novels, and I had like 6 novels. But my agent, who by the way is the most important part of your career, if you
Okay.
have a great agent, you have such a better chance to make it in writing. So my agent was said, "Would you ever consider doing picture books?" And I was like, "No way, young writers. I
Hmm.
I recommend being open to the whole career, not just the kind of book you think you want to write at age 17, because you never know where the industry will take you. Sometimes you will write a book and you will think of it as maybe this is a book for teens and it's going to come out as a YA novel.
Hmm.
Well, the publishing industry might get it and they might think, wait a second, this would be a great adult novel. We're going to have you work on a couple little parts of the book to make it more of an adult novel. And suddenly you might have a career as an adult novelist.
For young writers. So how do you decide that? How do you decide on a genre? How do you know that?
Yeah,
Oh,
well, it's interesting. So for me, it's evolved over time. So I've again, like I told you, I wanted to be published my entire life. That was my that was my goal. And going back, so as far as almost 20 years ago now, I used to try to write for adults. I used to write like what it was, basically called crime. And I wrote a manuscript, and I got an agent in New York, and they pitched it to all the major publishers, and they all had nice things to say, but ultimately they said, no, not for us, no, thank you. And then going back now was probably 9 years ago. Holidays were coming up, and I asked my daughter what she wanted. She said that she asked if I would write her a story, something that we could read together. And so it never occurred to me to write for children before. But when my daughter comes to me and asks if I would write her a story, that's what I'm going to do. So that's how I started writing for young readers.
Priya asked, you say on your website that you write for kids and their parents. How do you strike that balance to appeal to them all?
So in my books, one of the things I try to write not only really good, rich, young characters, but I try to make sure there are adults in there too. So even though I write fantasy, I actually have in my first series, I have a family unit. There's actually a family, which is really unusual in fantasy for kids. Like fantasy for young readers, there's a lot of orphans.
Orphan, yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I sort of worked around that, and I actually worked in. I like exploring family dynamics. I think that's important. So I try to infuse characters that adults can relate to into my work.
Your first novel in a really exotic setting. So like, can you tell me about like what inspired you to like go in that direction, which is kind of really unique, you know? Like, was it personal experience, or was it like, oh, I just want to, explore something that's like, you know, interesting?
I I was really interested in Russia.
Yeah.
I was really interested in Russia in high school and college, and I'd studied abroad in Moscow in college.
Hmm.
And I wanted to find a way to kind of combine, I mean, much like what you said, right? Like you wanted to study something that you feel like would sort of inform your writing or teach you about things that you wanted to write about. Russia for me was something I really wanted to write about. So I ended up applying to a grant to take me to Russia, like a creative writing research grant in Russia, in Kamchatka. And that was a really wonderful thing. It's nice with writing that like so many things you do and so many things you're interested in end up feeding the work.
So then how do you differentiate yourself enough to be noticed by a potential publisher or like an agent?
You, um, this sounds like very blasé, but
Yeah.
not blasé. It sounds like a cliche because it's something that agents say a lot, but I think it's true. You write a really, really good book.
Yeah.
It like itself is compelling, and part of that compelling story might be you being like, i'm I'm a physician, or I am a farmer, and I have no writing credits, but I wrote this incredible book in my spare time. Like that in itself is as compelling and interesting to people as, I have all of these. There was a book that came out this year or last year called, I believe, Cherry. And
Uh-huh.
it's by a guy who's a novel, and it's by a guy who's a bank robber and he's in
Cool.
prison right now, right? So he doesn't have like a ton of fancy writing credits.
One day I decided that I had something to say, and I'm just a can-do kind of guy. So, you know, like the thought process was, I have something to say, why don't I write a book? As opposed to something to say, maybe I should learn how to write. I never did. Now, I happen to have had a very good high school education in writing. So, you know, I'm not saying anybody can do this, but I was lucky to have a good high school